Hey Guy, welcome back to Sleep Among Titans, where we drift through strange and quiet corners of the past, perfect for listening before you sleep. Tonight we're opening a door that was often bolted shut in the Middle Ages. We're going to talk about the most private, most policed and most panicked over aspect of medieval life, the human heart, and all its messy, fleshy desires. A subject governed by a rulebook so thick it would make your head spin. To begin, I want you to imagine a place of immense quiet. It's the year 1350. Snow is falling silently outside the high-arched windows of Melk Abbey in Austria. Inside the scriptorium, lit by a single candle, an old monk named Brother Anselm is at work. He's copying a penitential, think of it, as the era's official handbook on what not to do, and the holy paperwork you'd have to file if you did. His quill pen made from a goose feather scratches a steady rhythm against the parchment. But then it stops. He has reached the chapter on de luxuria, the sins of the flesh. And in the vast silence of the monastery, his mind doesn't drift to fire and brimstone. No, it drifts to the memory of sunlight, the scent of apple blossoms, and a girl's laugh, a sound so distant it feels like it belongs to another man's life. That single, quiet moment of contradiction. It's our doorway into their world. From the cold, contractual duties of a noble's marriage bed to the earthy, no privacy whatsoever reality of a peasant's life. We'll explore the impossible poetic yearning of courtly love, a game which was ironically almost entirely about not following through. And we'll even touch on the bizarrely specific rules. The church laid out a kind of spiritual Kama Sutra, but with only the boring pages left in. Tonight, we're listening for the whispers in the margins of the rulebook, so get comfortable. Let the quiet of the abbey settle around you. Our story begins with the gentle scratch of a pen and a memory of sunlight. So while Brother Anselm is lost in his memory of sunlight, the system he lived within was vast and unyielding. To understand the private moments of medieval people, you first have to grasp the public architecture. They all lived inside an architecture of sin and salvation, designed and enforced by the church. The blueprint for this all started as many things did in a garden, with Adam and Eve and that famously problematic piece of fruit. The lesson learned from that story echoed down through the centuries. The flesh is weak. The body wasn't something to be celebrated. It was a beautiful, treacherous vessel that was always threatening to drag the soul down into the mud. As a result, the church issued a very detailed user manual for intimacy. It was given one and only one officially sanctioned purpose: procreation. It was a functional act, a duty to God to fill the earth and a duty to your Lord to fill his lands. Any hint of, well, pleasure was seen as a dangerous spark, a private vanity that could lead the soul astray. This led to what you might call a divine calendar of abstinence. You couldn't be intimate during Lent, or Advent, or on most major feast days, or on Wednesdays, Fridays and Sundays of every week. Honestly, when you look at the schedule, it's a minor miracle anyone was born between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. But beneath the almost comical level of regulation was a heavy, serious truth. People believed they were being watched. Not just by their neighbours, but by God. Every action had an eternal consequence. This divine architecture pressed down on everyone, but it felt very different depending on where you stood. For a highborn lady in a cold castle, it was about the silent, solemn duty of producing an heir. For a peasant in a crowded hut, it was about something far more fundamental, where the concept of privacy was a foreign dream. The rules were written in ink and stone, but life as always was lived in flesh and blood. Let us leave the quiet contemplation of the monastery for now and let our minds drift west across the plains of France to the windswept coast of Normandy. The year is much the same, the mid-14th century. We find ourselves inside the stone walls of a castle, but home is not the right word for this place. A fortress is more accurate, a great cold tooth of rock and timber designed to keep the world out and to project power. And in the heart of this fortress, in a chamber high up in the main, keep a candle burns. This is the Lord's bedchamber, and tonight it is a wedding chamber. But there is no air of celebration here. The joy of the feast downstairs, the noise, the music, the drunken laughter of knights and bannermen feels a world away, a faint echo from another life. Here there is only silence and a girl. She is 16 years old. Her name is Eleanor. Just a few hours ago she was Lady Eleanor of a neighbouring county. Now she's the wife of Lord Geoffrey, the master of this castle. She sits on a wooden stool by the hearth, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles are white. She's watching the fire, but she isn't really seeing it. The room is richly appointed by the standards of the day. A heavy tapestry depicting a rather bloody boar hunt has been nailed to the stone wall to keep out the worst of the draught. The bed is not just a mattress on the floor, but a heavy oak frame raised off the ground, piled high, with linen sheets, wool blankets, and the pelts of wolves. To a commoner, this would be the height of unimaginable luxury. To Eleanor, it is a vast alien landscape of duty, an unconquered territory she must soon occupy. She isn't thinking about love. The concept as we know it, a personal emotional bond, would be as foreign to her as the idea of flying. She's thinking about acres of land. She's thinking about a disputed forest, a river crossing, and 3 villages that until this afternoon belonged to her father. Now they belong to her husband. She's for all intents and purposes the living, breathing signature on a deed. The human wax seal that makes the contract binding. The heavy oak door groans open. It's a quiet, tired sound. Lord Geoffrey steps inside and closes it, the latch falling with a heavy final-sounding thunk. He's 40 years old, a veteran of 2 small wars and countless political skirmishes. He doesn't look cruel. He doesn't look kind. He looks tired. His face is a map of responsibilities weathered by sun and worry. He is not a monster. He is a man who inherited a title, and he spends his every waking moment trying to hold on to it, and perhaps pass on something slightly larger to his heir. He's the CEO of a large, cold and dangerous family business, and his marriage to Eleanor is a strategic merger. He doesn't speak to her. She doesn't speak to him. There are no words of comfort, no gentle pleasantries. That is not the currency of this moment. The currency is duty. He unbuckles the heavy leather belt that holds his dagger and lets it fall onto a chest. The sound is startlingly loud in the quiet room. Eleanor rises from the stool. Her body feels like it belongs to someone else. She moves towards the bed, her new life. Every step is a conscious effort. The air grows thick with unspoken purpose. The fire crackles and pops a lonely living sound in the chamber. What follows is not an act of passion. It is a ritual, a solemn physical sealing of a contract that has been negotiated for months by their fathers. It is as procedural and as devoid of romance as the signing of a treaty. He's likely thinking of the future of a son, a healthy son to hold these lands, to wear his armour, to ensure the family name does not vanish from the earth like so many others have. A son so he does not have to go through this expensive, awkward business again. She is thinking of surviving, of doing what she was born and raised to do. She closes her eyes and sees not her husband's face, but the face of her mother, who told her, "Your womb is your kingdom and your son is your crown. Do not fail." In the silence of the room, you can hear the wind howling around the stone turrets of the castle. You can hear the distant, reassuring bark of a hound from the courtyard below. This act hidden from the world is the central pillar of their entire society. It is a prayer made not with words, but with bodies. A silent, desperate plea to God and to fate for a male heir, so that this whole fragile alliance does not fall apart. And then, just as quietly as it began, it is over. The contract is sealed. Lord Geoffrey moves away, his part in the ritual complete. His duty for the night is done. Soon the slow, heavy breathing of sleep fills his side of the bed. But Eleanor lies still, wide awake in the vast, unfamiliar territory of her marriage bed. She listens to the wind, a lonely voice in the dark. In the space of a single evening, she has been transformed. She is no longer Eleanor the daughter. She is Lady Eleanor the wife, the potential mother of a future lord, a vessel. Her body is no longer her own. It is an asset, a piece of strategic land valuable only for what it might produce. For women of her class, this was the quiet, cold pinnacle of their existence. Their personal feelings, their private dreams, they were luxuries the family business could not afford. This silent, high-stakes world of the nobility, it was a universe away from the lives of the vast majority of people. Down below the castle walls, in the smoky, crowded huts of the common folk life and intimacy, were not about sealing treaties or securing bloodlines. They were about something else entirely, something earthier, simpler, and lived so closely together that the very idea of a private chamber with a fireplace and a wolf pelt blanket would have seemed like a king's fantasy. And it is to one of those huts that we will travel next. Now take a slow, deep breath. Let the image of the cold stone castle and the lonely Lady Eleanor dissolve like mist. We are travelling not across the land, but down the steep, rickety ladder of medieval society. All the way down, forget the scent of beeswax candles and cold stone. Replace it with the smell of damp earth, of slowly dying embers from a peat fire, and the faint, unmistakable and deeply honest aroma of livestock. We are in England now, in a peasant's hut. The year doesn't matter much here because one year was very much like the last. This is the world where the vast, overwhelming majority of people lived and died. Our home for this part of the story is a single room. Its walls are made of woven sticks and branches, what they called wattle, smeared with a thick layer of mud dung and clay called daub. The roof is thatch, and when it rains, which it often does, it drips in at least 3 different places. There is a hole in that roof to let out the worst of the smoke from the fire pit in the centre of the floor, but most of it stays inside, forever clinging to the walls, to your clothes, to the inside of your lungs. Here a family sleeps. Let's call them Ewan and Isolde. They are not 16 and 40. They are probably both in their late 20s, but their bodies look much older. Their faces are lined from the sun, their hands are calloused and hard from a lifetime of labour. Their bodies are not assets in a political game, they are tools. Tools for ploughing, for reaping, for hauling water, and weaving coarse cloth. At the end of a 14-hour day in the fields, they collapse onto a straw mattress on the floor, not with the nervous tension of a noble bride, but with the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a body that has been used to its absolute limit. And they are not alone. Of course they're not. On another pile of straw near them, 2 small children are curled together like puppies, breathing softly. In the corner, Isolde's aging father coughs a dry, rattling cough in his sleep, and near the door, for warmth and for safety from thieves, the family's most valuable possession, a goat occasionally shifts its weight with a soft rustle and a sigh. In this single, smoky, crowded room, the entire drama of human life unfolds. People were born here, they ate here, they got sick here, they argued here, and they died here. Privacy as we understand it has not been invented yet. It is a luxury item more valuable than silk, more rare than a dragon's tooth. Their one-room hut was the original open-plan living concept centuries ahead of its time. Imagine for a moment every quiet personal moment of your life unfolding in front of your entire family, and maybe a goat. It's a slightly horrifying thought, isn't it? But for them it wasn't horrifying. It was simply life. It was Tuesday. You didn't think about it because there was nothing else to think about. So when in the deep dark of the night Ewan reaches for Isolde under the shared wool blanket, it is an act of profound silence. A conversation held in gestures in the quiet language of a couple who has spent their entire lives in the pockets of others. There is no vast oak bed, no rustle of fine linen. There is the scratch and whisper of straw, and the purpose is entirely different from the one in the castle. There is no legacy to consider, no bloodline to secure in the grand sense. This act is not a prayer for a lord to carry a name. It is a gamble. It is the hope for another child, yes. But that hope is a double-edged sword. Another child means another pair of hands to help work the Lord's fields in 10 years' time. But it also means another mouth to feed right now in a world where hunger was a constant familiar ache in the belly. It is a moment of warmth against the cold, a small act of life in the face of a world that was often defined by an early death. It is simple, functional, and as natural as breathing. There is no shame, no coyness. How could there be when your children are sleeping 2 feet away? It is an act stripped of all artifice, all romance, all ceremony. It is life at its most fundamental, and when it is over there is no silent turning away into separate worlds of thought. There is only the continued shared reality of the room. Perhaps one of the children murmurs in their sleep and Isolde reaches out a hand to soothe them. Perhaps Ewan gets up to add a piece of dried peat to the embers of the fire, chasing away the deep, damp cold for another hour. Life doesn't stop and start. It flows uninterrupted. Their union wasn't sealed with a drop of wax on a parchment deed. It was forged in shared sweat, shared hunger, and the shared simple hope of seeing the sun rise together one more time. So we have seen the 2 poles of the medieval world. The cold, contractual intimacy of the powerful driven by legacy, and the earthy survivalist intimacy of the poor driven by necessity. Both in their own way were deeply practical. But what if there was another way to think about love? A way that had nothing to do with land or labour, a kind of love that was deliberately gloriously impractical, fantastical, and existed almost entirely in the mind. Well, that existed too. It was a beautiful, elaborate, and often frustrating game played by the very knights and ladies living in those cold stone castles. A game called courtly love, where the ultimate prize was not connection, but endless poetic and beautiful longing. And it is into that strange and perfumed world of unmet desire that we will drift next. Let the memory of the crowded English hut and the scent of damp earth fade from your mind. I want you to take a slow breath, and as you do, feel the air grow warmer, lighter. We're rising back up the social ladder, but we're also travelling south into the sun-drenched, sophisticated heart of 14th century France. Welcome to the Duchy of Aquitaine. Instead of a muddy yard, we find ourselves in a walled garden. The air here smells of roses and lavender. The harsh sounds of survival are replaced by the gentle buzzing of bees, and from somewhere over by a stone bench the soft, melancholic notes of a lute being played. This is the world of the castle again, but it's a different kind of castle. More poetry, less war, more wine, less ale. And here among the wealthy, the powerful and the occasionally bored, a new idea about love was taking root. It was an idea so refined, so complex, and so deliberately impractical that it could only have been born in a place where basic survival was no longer a daily concern. It was a game, an art form, and a philosophy all wrapped into one. They called it finnemores in their elegant tongue. We call it courtly love. Our players in this game are a young knight, let's call him Jean, and the lady of the castle, Isabel. And here is the first most important rule of the game: she is utterly, completely, and permanently unavailable. She's the wife of the very Lord Jean has sworn to serve and protect. Now, this game had a very strict and rather paradoxical set of rules. It was in a sense the original high-stakes, soul-crushingly poetic version of being in the friend zone. The love had to be a secret, a delicious, agonizing secret known only to the two of them, and perhaps a trusted handmaiden or a loyal squire. It was expressed not through grand declarations, but through 1,000 tiny coded gestures. It might be a glance held for just a single, dangerous second too long across a crowded great hall during a feast. It might be a poem written on a scrap of precious parchment filled with metaphors about a distant, unattainable star left anonymously on a chapel windowsill where she might find it. The greatest prize a knight could hope for was a favour from his lady, a silk ribbon, a scarf, even a single glove which he would tie to his lance or his helmet before riding into a tournament. He wasn't fighting for the prize money. He was fighting for her honour, inspired by her pure and distant perfection. The strangest rule of all, the goal of all this effort, was not to succeed. The game was not about consummation. In fact, achieving that would shatter the whole delicate fantasy. The pleasure, the art, the very point of it all was found in the longing. It was romance as a high-wire act performed for an audience of two, with the constant threat of a fatal fall into disgrace. Let's watch our two players in the garden. Jean is not looking at Isabel as he plays his lute. He's looking at a rosebush just beyond her. He sings his voice soft, a song about a humble sailor who worships the moon, knowing he can never touch her, but is content to steer his ship by her light. Every word is for Isabel. Every note is a declaration he cannot make. She's sitting with her handmaidens, pretending to be engrossed in her embroidery, but her needle has been still for the past 5 minutes. The air between them vibrates with unspoken words. After the song ends, she might call out, her voice light and clear, "A sad song, Sir Jean. Does the sailor never reach his moon?" And he might reply, bowing his head slightly, "My lady, to reach it would be to destroy it. Its beauty lies in its distance." That's it. That's the entire conversation. An exchange that is perfectly innocent to any onlooker, but to them it is a profound confirmation of their secret bond. It is the art of the almost. It seems almost silly to us now, all this effort for something that goes nowhere. But for them it was a profound emotional outlet. Think of Lady Eleanor in her cold contractual marriage. Courtly love was the escape hatch. It was a private world where her feelings, her choices, her power mattered. Because in this one specific game the woman held all the cards. She was the lord and the knight was her vassal. She was the goddess, and he was her humble worshipper. It was one of the only arenas in medieval life where a nobleman's worth was not tied to her womb or her father's land. Her worth was in her very being, her ability to inspire a man to be better. And it was a spiritual gym for the knight. Loving her from afar with no hope of reward was supposed to purify him of his baser instincts. It was meant to make him a more chivalrous, more honourable, more pious man. It was a ladder to God with the rungs made of poetic pining. But this entire beautiful, fragile fantasy of unfulfilled desire could only exist within the sunlit safety of the castle garden. It was a luxury, a game for those who did not have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. Outside those walls, in the growing chaotic towns and cities, intimacy and survival were intertwined in a much more brutal and far less poetic way. For a woman without the protection of a powerful husband or father, there were no games of glances and poems. There was only the cold, hard economy of the flesh, and it is into that shadow world, the world of women who had to sell their comfort, their safety and themselves, that we must now look. And so we must leave the sunlit, walled garden. Take a final breath of the scent of roses and allow it to fade completely from your mind. The sound of the lute is gone. The air grows cold and damp, and it carries a different set of smells: wet wool, stale beer, and the faint, sharp tang of sewage that was the signature perfume of every medieval city. We are in Paris now. Not the Paris of grand cathedrals and palaces, but the Paris of the back streets. We stand in a narrow, winding alley, where the tall, timber-framed houses lean in towards each other, almost blotting out the sliver of night sky above. The ground is slick with mud and refuse. This is the shadow side of the world we have been exploring, and in a recessed doorway a figure waits, trying to stay out of the worst of the rain. Her name is Marion. She's perhaps 20 years old, though a hardness in her eyes makes her seem older. She's cold. Her feet are damp. She's not playing a game. She's working. This is her world, not a castle or a field or a convent. Her geography is this alley, the rowdy tavern at the end of it, and the cold church steps where she's allowed to beg but not to pray. Who was she before this alley? We can only guess. Was she a weaver's daughter, whose family was taken by the sweating sickness, leaving her with nothing? A soldier's widow whose in-laws cast her out? A servant girl dismissed without a reference, after catching the eye of the master of the house? It doesn't truly matter. The stories are countless, but they all end here. The path to this alley was rarely chosen. It was the place you ended up when all other paths, daughter, wife, widow, nun, had slammed shut. It was the last choice left for a woman alone in a world that had no safety net for her. A shadow detaches itself from the far end of the alley. A man, his face hidden by the brim of his hat and the darkness. Marion straightens up. There are no words exchanged. Words are a luxury for a different kind of transaction. This is silent, swift, and stripped of all humanity. It is a transaction of ghosts. And in these moments, Marion has learned to do something remarkable. She has learned to make her mind a quiet, blank space. She retreats to a small, walled-off room in her thoughts, a place no one can touch. She does not think of the man. She does not think of the cold. She thinks of the price of a loaf of bread. She thinks of the coin she needs for a room for the night, a real room with a door that locks. She does the grim mathematics of survival. Her body is here in the alley, but her soul is somewhere else counting pennies. And here lies one of the great ugly hypocrisies of the age. The same society that condemned Marion as a source of sin, a fallen woman, a gateway to hell, also quietly relied on her existence. In many cities, including this one, the authorities licensed and taxed brothels. It was a pragmatic, if deeply cynical, form of sin management. A way for the city fathers to contain and profit from a business they publicly declared would send everyone involved into the arms of the devil. She was a necessary evil, a sewer to carry away the lusts that might otherwise threaten the good, respectable wives and daughters of the city. She was both reviled and required. The transaction is over. The shadow retreats back into the night, leaving only the sound of his footsteps fading on the wet stones. Marion is alone again with the damp and the cold. The coin is heavy in her hand. It means she will eat tomorrow. It means she will be warm for a few hours. For a moment, she leans her head back against the rough wooden door and looks up through the narrow gap between the leaning buildings. She can see a sliver of the moon. It is the same moon that the night Jean sang about, the symbol of his pure and unattainable lady. The same moon that Lady Eleanor might see from her high castle window. To Marion, it's not a symbol of anything. It is just the moon, a cold, distant, silent witness to the world below. And in its pale, indifferent light, she is just a woman trying to live until morning. This grim reality raises a difficult question. Who was writing all these rules? The men who condemned her from the pulpit, who wrote the penitentials that listed her sins in such detail. What did they truly know of a cold alleyway? What did they know of the kind of hunger that drives a person to the very brink of their own soul? They too were men of flesh and blood, and in the absolute quiet of their own cells, far from the temptations of the city, they fought their own silent, desperate wars against the very same human nature. And it is into the most silent battle of all, the one fought within the soul, of a holy man that we must now go. Let the image of Marion and the cold Paris moonlight dissolve. Let go of the city, the garden, the hut and the castle. We are travelling back through the night, back through all the stories to where our journey began. We are returning to the deep, profound quiet of Melk Abbey, overlooking the dark ribbon of the Danube River. We are back with Brother Anselm. The candle on his desk has burned lower, the flame-eaten wick now casting a softer, warmer glow. The page of the penitential he was copying is now filled with his elegant, careful script, a testament to hours of focused work. But his pen is still. He has not turned the page. He is sitting in the silence, a silence so complete it feels like a physical presence in the room. We have seen the struggles of the outside world. The noblewoman's duty, the peasant's reality, the knight's fantasy, the prostitute's survival. But here in this small stone room is the front line of the medieval war against the flesh. The battle here is not for land or for money or even for survival. It is for the soul itself, and the enemy is memory. Anselm's vow of celibacy was not merely a promise to avoid the touch of another. It was a promise to wage war on his own thoughts, to stand guard at the gates of his own mind, and turn away any memory or fantasy that bore the scent of sin. Imagine trying to forbid the tide from coming in armed only with a prayer book. That was his life's work. A full-time job with no holidays, fought on a battlefield the size of your own skull. The memory that haunts him is not some lurid, wicked thing. That would be easier to fight, to label as a demon and cast out. No, it is the memory from the apple orchard. He remembers the girl's name now, Elodie. He remembers the impossible, dizzying warmth of the sun on his face, a warmth that felt like God's own approval. He remembers the sweet, cidery smell of fallen apples fermenting on the ground, a smell of life and decay all at once. Her laugh wasn't seductive, it was just happy, free. The sound of a life lived under the open sky. And that is the cruelest part. His great personal temptation isn't a devil with horns and a pitchfork. It's a memory of sunlight, a moment of simple, uncomplicated human happiness from a life he chose to leave behind. So how does a man fight a memory? He builds a fortress around his mind. The monastery itself is that fortress. The cold stone floors, the hard bed, the bland food, all designed to quiet the body's demands. The rhythm of the day is his shield. The bell that calls him to morning prayers before dawn. The bell for work. The bell for meals in the silent refectory. The bell for evening vespers. These bells were the scaffolding of his sanity. Each one called him to a task, pulling his mind away from the dangerous, uncharted wilderness of his own past. And this work, copying the words of long-dead saints, was the sharpest sword in his arsenal. The meticulous, focused, repetitive motion of the quill on the parchment, forming each letter perfectly. It was a form of meditation, a way to impose divine order onto the chaos of his thoughts. The steady scratch, scratch, scratch of the pen was his prayer, a shield against the memory of a laugh. He gets up and walks to the small unshuttered window of his cell. He looks out not at a city street, but at the immense dark landscape. He can't see it, but he can hear the Danube River flowing endlessly towards the sea. He watches the silhouette of a bird fly across the face of the moon, and in this moment a sliver of doubt, a question, as old as his vow, enters his mind. God made the river to flow. He made the birds to build their nests and sing for their mates. He made the apple trees to blossom and bear fruit. He made Elodie to laugh in the sunshine. God made a world that sings and bursts with life and creation. And yet Anselm's sacred duty is to build a dam within himself to stop that very river from flowing. Is his struggle a holy act, or is it a fight against God's own beautiful, vibrant design? The question hangs in the cold air, vast and unanswerable. He does not have an answer, but he has his faith. Perhaps he thinks this is the hardest service of all, not to live as nature made you, but to strive every single day for something beyond it. To choose the spirit over the flesh, not because the flesh is evil, but because the spirit's path is harder and therefore holier. He turns from the window, his resolve hardened once more. We have now seen 5 lives, 5 separate worlds, all wrestling with the same fundamental human urges, but through the different lenses of their class, their gender and their vocation. But what if the answer to their struggles wasn't just found in their prayers or their social roles? What if they believed the key was in the body itself? They had a theory for that. They believed the body was a small cosmos, an entire universe. in miniature governed by an internal weather system of 4 mysterious fluids. They thought that love, desire, anger and sadness were not just emotions but symptoms of an imbalance in this internal climate. Before we continue with our stories, perhaps we should take a quiet moment to understand the very strange and very beautiful map they used to navigate themselves. Let's take a brief pause here. Let the stories of Eleanor, Ewan, Jean Marion and Anselm settle around us like dust motes in a sunbeam. Before we go any further into their world, we need to look at the map they used to navigate their own inner lives. It's a very strange map to our eyes, but for them it was the bedrock of science and medicine. It was called the theory of the 4 humours. The idea inherited from the ancient Greeks was that every human body was a little world, a cosmos in miniature, containing 4 principal liquids or humours. These were blood phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. Health and sanity itself depended on these 4 fluids remaining in perfect harmonious balance. Sickness both of the body and of the mind was simply a sign that one humour was overwhelming the others. Each humour produced a different temperament. Too much blood, which was associated with the element of air, made you sanguine, cheerful, optimistic, rosy-cheeked, and prone to falling in love. Too much phlegm associated with water made you phlegmatic, calm, thoughtful, perhaps a bit sluggish. Too much yellow bile linked to fire made you choleric, a fiery, ambitious leader, your classic hothead. And too much black bile tied to the earth made you melancholic, sad, poetic and creative, the sensitive, artistic soul. And this is where it connects directly back to our story. Desire, passion, the sins of the flesh that so worried Brother Anselm were often diagnosed simply as a medical problem, an excess of hot, moist blood. A sudden consuming infatuation wasn't just your soul making a poor choice. It was likely your liver, which they believed produced the blood, working a bit too hard. It was a way to pathologize feeling, to turn an overwhelming spiritual crisis into a manageable physical imbalance that could perhaps be treated with a change in diet. This theory was another kind of law, a natural law that governed the body existing alongside the laws of God and the laws of men. So with this strange and beautiful map of the soul now in our hands, let us return to the world of rules and consequences and see how they were written down not just in medical texts, but in the law of the land itself. Let the idea of the 4 humours settle in your mind, a strange, elegant system for explaining the unpredictable weather of the human soul. If those were the invisible laws written inside the body, there was another much harsher set of laws written for the world outside. These were the laws of men and the laws of God all tangled up together into a set of powerful invisible fences designed to keep the flock from straying. To understand how these fences worked, we must travel to a small English village, and we must attend a session of the local manorial court. Now don't picture a grand courtroom with judges in wigs. Picture the great hall of the local lord's manor house, or on a warm day simply a clearing under a large oak tree. The judge is the lord's reeve, his manager a man who is more farmer than lawyer. The clerk, painstakingly taking notes, is the village priest. And the jury? Well, the jury is the entire village, a collection of neighbours whose main qualification for the job was being incredibly nosy. Before the court today stand 2 young people. Let's call them Thomas and Agnes. They are not murderers. They are not thieves. They are guilty of what you might call an unregulated beginning. They have been accused by their neighbours of fornication, of being together as man and wife without the permission of the church or their families. They stand with their heads bowed, their faces burning with shame, as the reeve hears the evidence. And the evidence is flimsy, almost comical to our modern ears. There is no forensic proof. There are only whispers and suspicious observations. Did goodwife Elspeth see Thomas's silhouette leaving Agnes's cottage well after the curfew bell? Did Miller John overhear them talking too closely behind the hayricks during the last festival? Justice here was a public performance, and the script was often written by little more than gossip. But the gossip is enough. They are found guilty. Their sentence is not death or imprisonment. It is something quieter, more insidious, and in some ways more crushing public humiliation, designed to repair the moral fabric of the village. First, there is a fine, perhaps a shilling or even a pig, a devastating economic blow for a poor family. But the real punishment comes the following Sunday. Picture the scene. The entire village is gathered for Mass. But Thomas and Agnes are not allowed inside the church. They must stand outside the main doors barefoot, wearing simple white shifts regardless of the weather. Each of them must hold a lit candle for the entire duration of the service. At a key moment, the priest will come to the doorway and deliver a sermon directed right at them, denouncing their sin for all to hear, reminding everyone of the fires of hell that await the unrepentant. They must stand there and feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, the eyes of their friends, their families, their elders, eyes that are curious, some that are pitying, but many that are scornful. This is the invisible fence now made brutally visible. It's a wall of shame built brick by brick with every stare and every whisper. It's designed not just to punish them, but to serve as a terrifying warning to every other young person in the village. This is what happens when you cross the line. Why this obsession? Why this public theatre of shame over something that seems so private? Because to them it wasn't private at all. An unregulated union could lead to chaos. A child born outside of marriage had no clear inheritance, no one legally bound to support them. They were a loose thread that could unravel the tight weave of the whole community. In a world with no social safety net, an illegitimate child was a burden the entire village might have to bear. So the law wasn't just enforcing morality. It was protecting the fragile social and economic order of a world where every bushel of wheat and every pair of working hands mattered. It was a matter of pure, practical survival. The invisible fences were there to protect the village from the consequences of a passion that didn't follow the rules. But these fences, these laws, were not just concerned with the straightforward, understandable sins like the one committed by Thomas and Agnes. Their transgression was common. It was human. It was in its own way normal. There were other lines you could cross, other acts that were considered so much worse they were spoken of only in horrified whispers. They were called sins against nature, acts that struck not just at the social order, but at the very order of God's creation. These were the accusations made in secret, the crimes so terrible, they were often punished not with shame, but with fire. And it is into that deeper, more silent darkness of the unspeakable that we must now venture. Let the image of the village square and the public shaming of Thomas and Agnes fade. We must leave that world of known, understandable sin behind. We are moving now from the public square into the locked room, from the shouted sermon into the terrified whisper. We are descending into a deeper, quieter, and more dangerous shadow of the medieval world. We are entering the realm of the unspeakable. There were some acts, some forms of love that were considered so profoundly wrong, they were grouped under a single terrifying name: sodomy. The sin against nature. To us the term is specific. To them it was a vast and shadowy category for any act of intimacy that could not, under any circumstances, create life. It was a rejection of the great singular purpose God had set for humanity. It was seen as an act of rebellion against the very machinery of creation. Its crime was not passion but sterility. It was a dead end. And in their world, a dead end was a direct affront to God. When we look for the voices of the people who lived in this shadow, we find almost nothing. There are no love letters, no poems celebrating a forbidden same-sex love. The historical record is a profound, deafening silence. And we must understand that this silence is not an accident. It is the sound of erasure. History is not just the story of what happened, it is the story of what was allowed to be remembered, and these lives, these loves were condemned to be forgotten, so we cannot tell their story directly. We can only trace their outlines by the fear and the hatred they inspired. We can only tell the story of the accusation. Imagine two knights in a military order. Let's call them Philippe and Renaud. They have fought side by side for a decade. They have saved each other's lives on the battlefield in the Holy Land. Their bond is legendary, held up as the highest example of chivalric brotherhood and loyalty. They would die for one another without a moment's hesitation, but a rival, a man jealous of their standing, plants a seed. A whisper to a priest during confession. A quiet word in a lord's ear. Their friendship. He might say, it seems unnatural. He doesn't need proof. The accusation is the weapon. Suddenly the way other men look at Philippe and Renaud changes. There is a chill in the air. Their heroic loyalty is re-examined through a new poisoned lens. Every gesture of camaraderie is now suspect. The bond that was their greatest strength becomes a liability that could see them excommunicated, disgraced, or even burned at the stake. This terrible weapon was not just used to destroy personal reputations. It could be used to bring down empires. In the early 14th century, the Knights Templar were one of the most powerful and wealthy organizations in Christendom. And when the King of France, who was deeply in their debt, decided to destroy them, he accused their entire order of heresy and sodomy. The charge was so horrific, so toxic, that it paralyzed any potential allies. It was the ultimate slander because it was a sin so dark few would dare to defend anyone accused of it. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like. To know that your truest, most natural feelings were considered a crime worse than murder by the world around you. To live in a state of constant, vigilant fear. The sheer crushing loneliness of it. To know that a single misplaced word, a glance held too long, an anonymous accusation from an enemy could lead to your absolute ruin. This was a life lived in a prison of silence. All of these laws, we have discussed these condemnations and punishments, from the public shaming to the secret accusation, were overwhelmingly written and enforced by men. They were abstract, theological, and legalistic. They were concerned with sin and property, and the order of the kingdom. But on the ground, in the world of flesh and blood, it was the women who dealt with the most tangible, immediate, and life-altering consequence of any sexual act, the possibility of a new life growing within them. And while the men of the church were busy defining sin, the women were quietly practicing a different kind of knowledge, a different kind of power. It was a wisdom passed down not in books but in whispers from mother to daughter, from neighbour to neighbour. The secret world of herbs and midwifery. And it is into this hidden female domain of knowledge that we will turn next. Let us turn away now from the world of ink and law, from the pronouncements of priests and the judgments of men. We are leaving the formal, stone-built world of the church and the manor court and entering a different kind of space, a place of quiet power that was almost exclusively the domain of women. We're stepping into the cottage of the midwife. The air inside does not smell of incense or old parchment. It smells of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and others whose names are known only to a few. It smells of wood smoke and boiling water. This is the domain of a woman we might call Old Elspeth. She's a widow, perhaps 60 years old, with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and eyes that have seen everything. She cannot read or write a single word. Her knowledge does not live in books. It lives in her hands, in her memory, and in the fragrant, chaotic garden behind her cottage. Her public official role was that of the midwife. In this she was the absolute authority. The birthing chamber was a sacred female space. No man, not even the husband or the priest, was typically allowed to enter once a woman's labour began. The university trained male physicians of the day, who could lecture for hours in Latin on the theories of Galen, knew more about the movement of the planets than they did about the practical realities of the female body. Here their theories were useless. Here Elspeth was queen. She was the calm voice, the steady hand, the one who knew when to wait and when to act, who could turn a baby stuck in the wrong position, who knew the right prayers to say and the right tea to brew to soothe the mother's panic. But Elspeth and women like her all over Christendom held a deeper, more secret and far more dangerous knowledge. It was a wisdom whispered from mother to daughter, a practical understanding of the body's cycles and secrets. It was the knowledge of how to manage fertility. In a world where another pregnancy could mean starvation for her existing children, a married woman might come to Elspeth's door, her face etched with worry. In a world where being single and pregnant meant total ruin, a terrified young woman like Agnes might creep to her cottage after dark, begging for help. They would not have used words like contraception or abortion. They would have spoken in code, asking for herbs to bring on a late bleeding, or to restore the natural female cycle, and the midwife would listen. She would go to her garden or her drying racks, and her hands would know what to find. It was said that a strong tea of pennyroyal or rue could persuade a pregnancy not to take root. They knew of herbs that could cause powerful cramping contractions. This knowledge was not science. It was a desperate form of herbal alchemy, a gamble. It could work, or it could lead to hemorrhage, poison, and death. It was a last resort, a choice made when all other choices were worse. This made Elspeth one of the most powerful and most vulnerable people in the village. She was the keeper of life. Her hands were the first to hold every newborn. She was also the keeper of the village's secrets. She knew who was struggling to conceive and who was desperate not to. This power was a heavy burden. A successful birth made her a hero. A stillbirth or a mother's death, however, could easily lead to whispers. Whispers of carelessness, or worse, whispers of witchcraft. She walked a razor's edge between reverence and ruin, so there existed these two parallel streams of knowledge in the medieval world. The priest had his Latin books, his rigid rules, his theology of sin and the soul. His was a knowledge of how life should be lived. The midwife had her garden, her experience, and the collected wisdom of 1,000 grandmothers. Hers was a knowledge of how life is lived, messy, painful, fertile, and fragile. This hidden practical knowledge was a secret language spoken among women. But secrets in the Middle Ages had a way of seeping out of hiding in plain sight. What if these anxieties, these beliefs about the body and the soul, were not always confined to the midwife's cottage or a whispered conversation? What if they were carved into the very stone of the churches themselves, or painted into the intricate margins of the holy books? There existed a whole other world of secrets, a language of symbols that told a different story about love, temptation, and the flesh, if you only knew how to read it. Let us leave the earthy practical warmth of the midwife's cottage. We're going to learn to read a different kind of secret language, now unwritten not with herbs but in stone wood and ink. We're going to look at the world through medieval eyes, and to do that we have to understand one thing. To them the world was a book written by God, and everything in it, every animal, every plant, every object was a symbol, a secret message about the divine plan. Let's start in the most public of spaces, a great cathedral. Look up at the vast stained glass window glowing like a collection of jewels. It tells the story of Adam and Eve. See them in the first panel, standing naked and unashamed in the garden, their bodies depicted not with shame, but with a kind of simple, innocent grace. Then look at the next panel after the temptation. See the sly, knowing serpent coiled around the tree. And now look at Adam and Eve themselves. Their bodies are hunched, their hands are clasped over themselves, their faces are masks of anguish. This single story, repeated over and over on church walls and doors, was the foundation of their entire view of the flesh. It was a source of innocence lost and a gateway to shame and sin. But for every Eve, there had to be an anti-Eve. For the symbol of temptation, there had to be a symbol of purity. And for that, we turn to a different kind of art, a woven tapestry hanging on a cold castle wall. It depicts a beautiful, serene forest, and in it a mythical creature, a luminous white unicorn, lays its head peacefully in the lap of a young noblewoman. This was the legend of the unicorn, a creature so wild it could not be captured, but so pure it would willingly submit to a virgin. It was a powerful and romantic symbol for the Virgin Mary, the ultimate feminine ideal, who redeemed the sin of Eve. It was a story that said purity had a magical power all its own. That was the official story told in grand public art. But the medieval mind was also playful, subversive, and deeply human, and for that you have to know where to look. Let us go back into the church, to the choir stalls where the monks would stand for their long hours of prayer. If you were to lift the hinged wooden seats, you would find carved on the underside a small ledge. This was called a misericorde, a mercy seat for the monks to lean on. And on these hidden ledges they carved a secret world. Here, hidden from the public eye, you find the most astonishing satirical and sometimes downright naughty carvings. A fox dressed as a priest preaching to a flock of geese, a monkey playing the bagpipes, a husband getting hit over the head with a ladle by his angry wife, a knight battling a giant snail, and yes, sometimes a man with his trousers down bearing his bottom at the world. These were the private jokes of the clergy, a place to carve their frustrations, their complaints, and their recognition of the absurd, silly, and sinful nature of the world. It was a reminder that even in the house of God, humanity in all its messy glory was still present. And what of romantic love, for that we look inside the precious hand-painted books of the nobility. In the illustrated manuscripts of stories like Tristan and Isolde, we see courtly love in action. We see a knight and lady playing a game of chess by a window, the strategic game a perfect metaphor for their careful courtship. We see the secret exchange of a ring or a lover climbing a ladder to a tower window. The art here is not about sin or salvation, but about that delicate, painful, beautiful longing that was the heart of the romantic ideal. To live in this world was to be surrounded by stories. A unicorn meant purity, a serpent meant temptation, a fox meant trickery, a dog meant loyalty. The world was saturated with meaning, and they saw no contradiction in having a carving of the Virgin Mary in one part of the church and a carving of a cheeky fool in another. They understood that the world was a place of both prayer and absurdity, of high ideals and low humour, but this symbolic way of seeing the world, this forest of meaning where everything pointed to something else, could not last forever. Towards the end of this long era, a new wind began to blow from the south, from Italy. A new idea was stirring a philosophy we now call humanism. It celebrated humanity not as a fallen creature in a forest of symbols, but as a creature of beauty, intellect, and potential in its own right. It was the dawn of a new age that would begin to untangle the soul from sin, and to see the human body not as a source of shame to be hidden, but as a work of art to be studied and celebrated. And it is to that moment of profound, quiet change that we will turn for our final story. Imagine a long, long sunset. For 100 years or more from the mid-14th century onwards, the sun was setting on the medieval world. It wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow fading of one kind of light, a gradual lengthening of the shadows. And in that lingering twilight, as the old certainties began to cool, the first pale grey light of a new day was beginning to touch the horizon. An era we now call the Renaissance. The world we've been exploring tonight was a world defined by the group. You were a peasant bound to the land and the village. You were a nobleman bound to your lineage and your duties. You were a monk bound to your order. Your personal individual story was almost always secondary to the story of the role you were born to play. Your purpose was to fit into God's great unchanging tapestry. But now a new and radical idea was whispering its way from the sunny, bustling city-states of Italy. A philosophy we call humanism. And its central revolutionary idea was this: what if the most interesting, most important, most worthy subject of study was not just God's divine plan, but the human being itself? What if the story of a single unique human life was a story worth telling? You can feel this profound shift happening in the stories they began to tell. For centuries, the bestsellers had been the lives of saints, pious tales of suffering, miracles, and martyrdom. But now, new kinds of books were being written. In Italy, a writer named Boccaccio wrote the Decameron. It's a collection of 100 tales told by a group of young, wealthy Florentines hiding in a country villa to escape the horrors of the Black Death. And the stories they tell are not about saints. They are funny, tragic, clever, and refreshingly worldly. They are tales of witty merchants, passionate lovers, unfaithful wives, and greedy, foolish, and intensely human priests. For the first time in popular literature, the characters felt less like symbols and more like people you might actually meet. People driven by love, greed, cleverness, and desire right here on earth, without constant reference to the world to come. A little later in England, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, and here too you see a rich new tapestry of humanity. On a pilgrimage to Canterbury, a whole cross-section of society travels together, each telling a story. We meet a noble, perfect knight, but we also meet the wife of Bath, a clothmaker, who has been married 5 times and speaks openly and with great humour about sex, marriage and power from a woman's point of view. She's a character who would have terrified the theologians who wrote the rule books. We meet a corrupt pardoner who openly admits to swindling poor villagers. Chaucer paints them all not as simple figures of good and evil, but as complex, flawed and fascinating individuals. In these stories, desire is not always a sin to be punished. It's often the engine of the plot, a source of great comedy or deep tragedy. The human body is not always a vessel of shame. It is a source of beauty, pleasure and humour. And this change was happening in art too. Artists began to study human anatomy to paint the body with a new breathtaking realism. They were looking at humanity not just as a fallen soul in need of redemption, but as a marvel of creation. Now this was not a switch being flipped. The old world didn't just vanish. The medieval mindset, with its deep-seated fear of sin and its symbolic view of the world, still held powerful sway for centuries. Think of it more like a long, slow thawing after a deep winter. The ice was still there, but cracks were appearing, the air was changing, new things could grow. The absolute monopoly of the old world view was breaking. And our characters from tonight, Eleanor in her cold castle, Ewan and Isolde in their smoky hut, the lovelorn Jean in his garden, the lonely Marian in her alley, and the conflicted Brother Anselm in his cell. They all lived within that long twilight. They were figures of the late medieval world standing on the shore of their age, perhaps, squinting at a light on the horizon they couldn't yet name. Their world of rigid roles and symbolic meaning was beginning to fade, but their human hearts, their hopes for a child, their longing for connection, their fear of damnation, their need for survival, their quiet moments of doubt and grace, those are the timeless threads. The threads that stretch across the centuries and land softly here in our modern world, reminding us that the human story is, and always has been, a complicated one. And so, our long journey through the secret heart of the Middle Ages comes to its end. We have walked in the twilight of their world, and now we must let the darkness settle completely. For our final moment together, let us make one last journey back through the night, back to where we started, back to that quiet room in Melk Abbey. Brother Anselm is still there, a solitary figure in the vastness of the monastery. His work for the night is done. The final word on the page has been written. With a soft sigh that is part weariness, part satisfaction, he closes the heavy cover of the book. The sound is a soft, leathery thump that seems to fill the silence of the room. He does not put it away. He simply rests his hand on the cover, the hand of a man which has spent a lifetime copying the laws of God, a hand that remembers the feeling of an apple's smooth skin all those years ago. He looks at the candle. It has burned low, a pool of soft wax gathered at its base. It has been his faithful companion through the long, quiet hours. It has lit his path through the difficult words, the complex rules, the lists of sins and penances. He leans forward, his old shoulders casting a giant, flickering shadow on the stone wall behind him. He takes a single soft breath. The flame flutters for a moment, dancing wildly as if fighting for its life. It throws one last golden splash of light across his face, and then it is gone. A final thin wisp of grey smoke rises from the blackened wick, a tiny ghost released into the air, carrying with it the scent of hot wax and extinguished light. The room plunges into a deep velvety darkness, broken only by the pale cold moonlight filtering through the high window. The page is invisible now. The stern words of the penitential are lost to the dark. The laws, the rules, the threats of damnation, they have all vanished with the light. But the memory of sunlight in an apple orchard that remains, the feeling of warmth on the skin, the sound of a girl's happy laugh that the darkness cannot touch. In the end, it is the only thing that's real. And in this final quiet, we can almost hear the echoes of our other travellers, their stories now woven together into a single human tapestry. The quiet determination in Lady Eleanor's heart, a seed of resilience planted in a cold castle bed. The simple shared warmth of Ewan and Isolde, a small fire against the immense darkness of survival. The beautiful, impossible yearning of Sir Jean, a love made of poetry and distance. The profound loneliness of Marian, a silent figure in an alley, witnessed only by the moon. Their struggles, their secrets, their quiet acts of defiance and survival, all now gentle down into the soft silence of the past. And now, the last echo fades, the abbey is gone, the past grows quiet, and you are here, safe in the warmth of your bed, in a quiet room where no one is watching, no one is judging. They lived their lives under the weight of constant scrutiny, their every act measured against the hope of heaven and the fear of hell. You live in the freedom of this peaceful moment in a world that allows you the space to simply be. They knew the hardness of a straw pallet, the gnawing ache of hunger, the chilling draught of a stone wall. You know the softness of your pillow, the comfort of your blanket. But the hearts that beat in those distant bodies were not so different from our own. The need for warmth, the longing for a kind touch, the hope that a child would be born healthy, the fear of being alone, the simple, quiet peace of feeling safe next to another human being. That fundamental truth is the bridge of empathy that connects their world to ours. It's the reminder that across all the centuries, across all the different rules and beliefs, the human heart has always sought the same few precious things. So now it is time to let them go. Let their stories dissolve. Let their struggles and their sorrows become a part of the quiet, sleeping earth. Feel the weight of their world lift from your shoulders. You have been a kind and silent witness to their lives, and your part in their story is now done. There are no rules you need to follow now, no penance to be paid, no secrets you need to keep. There is only the gentle rhythm of your own breathing rising and falling like a slow, peaceful tide. Let the darkness be a blanket. Let the silence be a comfort. The story is over. It is time to rest. It is time to sleep.